This week I have been thinking about what does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness? We all have had that feeling of being persecuted at one time or another. On Amazon, you can rent a TV series called The Big C, meaning the Big C meaning cancer. And there are four characters in this particular series. There's the husband, the wife, a son, and then a live-in student around the same age as the son. The wife is dealing with the Big C. The husband had a near-death experience, being dead for about 3 minutes and then coming back to life. The son is struggling with being 16. And having no supportive parents who are literally fighting for their lives. And the live-in female student is struggling with her African American heritage, as well as being a teenager. One of the common attitudes in this family is that each of them is feeling persecuted in one fashion or another. The husband feels persecuted because of the lack of support from his wife in his newfound career as a public motivational speaker. The mother with cancer feels persecuted because everyone thinks that she is spending too much energy on herself. The son is feeling persecuted because, he is a teenager, and all of those emotional and hormonal things that goes with being at that stage of life. And the young African American girl is feeling persecuted because of her racial heritage. The truth is, we all feel personally persecuted at times by someone or something to some degree. Segments of the evangelical Christian church felt persecuted when ordered by the government not to meet physically in March of 2020 due to the COVID. In fact, I just was reading an article the other day that has a petition being passed around town by a evangelical Christian woman who is feeling that as a religious right, she is being persecuted by the schools, mandating that this year her children start attending wearing masks. And this letter says, under religious beliefs, my child is not going to do this. And it is a petition where each parent who has that same feeling of being persecuted, I suppose, from a religious standpoint, can sign and try to pass that off through their local school district. Teenagers feel persecuted when they are subject to curfew hours that might not match up with their friends. Ever hear that one? When we perceive that our rights are being infringed upon by an outside force like mandatory mask wearing, we can translate those feelings as being persecuted. Yet, is it true persecution, or is it really about our egos being bruised? In the act of persecution, is it just a feeling that comes out of differing opinions, or does persecution have to entail true physical violation toward that person? I would say yes and yes. When one person or group of people feel their ideas are the only correct ideas, coupled with a sense of empowerment that are then imposed upon other people or groups that are perceived to be of lesser importance, maybe even seen as scapegoats for the ills of the more empowered, you have a formula for persecution to arise. Persecution can occur as victimization, abuse, torture, torment, oppression, tyranny, discrimination, mistreatment, ill treatment, maltreatment, and subjugation. Even tolerance is a form of persecution. Non-Christian religious groups, people of color, those living in poverty, and yes, even teenagers all experience persecution in this country. Let's face it. What teenager do you know who does not feel that they are not being persecuted? When we read the Gospels, we read them as if they were being recorded as life was happening. And yet, Matthew was written about 50 years after Jesus had died. And it was written to an audience that was experiencing severe physical persecution by the Romans. They understood firsthand the reality of living under the power of a foreign government. They understood firsthand the persecution from the leaders of their own religion for following the teachings of Jesus and then being ostracized by the Jewish community at large. We live in the United States, where being a Christian has no penalties, where we are not persecuted when we identify ourselves as being Christian, because Christianity is the acceptable religion. So how can we Christians understand the perils of persecution as Christ was teaching in the Beatitudes? Remember, it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The key to this teaching does not come in religious identification. The key is found in the word righteousness, that of right doing. This beatitude has nothing to do with religious conviction and everything to do with justice. In this morning's Hebrew text, about the 3 young Jewish men who refused to bow down to the idolatry of worshiping false gods, they are persecuted for standing up for righteousness. These men, even though they were exiles, had been given great power by the king in helping govern Babylon. And it was out of jealousy that the king's court conspired to persecute Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Once the king discovers that these 3 young men would not bow down to his inflated ego, in a rage, he had them thrown into fire. I think the lesson in this story comes in the reply of these 3 young men that they gave when asked by King Nebuchadnezzar to change their alliance, saying, "If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God that we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if God does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up." These young men trusted God with their lives to deliver them from the tyrannical power of the king. But even if they were not physically rescued, they believed so strongly that it was better to die following the law of their God, which was, "You shall have no other God before you except me." It was better for them to follow that law than to give in and become a part of the system that they understood as unjust. You see, it is the unjust systems in a society that tempt us with other gods. We who call ourselves Christian in this country know very little about persecution for our faith, because the church is a part of the status quo. We are a part of the power structure. But if you find yourself stepping outside of that acceptable norms of the church, just as Jesus did, then you might very well find yourself in hot water. When the church speaks out against the victimization of religious persecution of Muslims, or against a political agenda of building walls only on our southern borders, or against the discrimination that says not all people in our country should have basic medical care, adequate housing, or a livable minimum wage, or speak out against the epidemic of gun violence, which is a public health problem, then the church, who is fighting for justice and righteousness of right doing, can expect to be persecuted by churches who follow the status quo, who follow King Nebuchadnezzar's orders, so to speak. Our spiritual walk cannot exclude social justice issues, my friend, such as immigration reform, equal rights for minorities, or of how we view our carbon footprint on our Mother Earth. Science has just published a report about the slowing down of the Atlantic current, and when it stops circulating, it will bring devastating changes to the climate of the northern hemisphere. And if you can't quite imagine what the devastation would look like, just rent the movie The Today After Tomorrow, which deals with the slowing down of the Atlantic current and how Mother Nature recorrects itself and brings into a sudden change in climate. Persecution comes at many levels. Some in big topics that have distributive justice at the heart of their issues. And I wonder if I could be a Shadrach, Meshach, or an Abednego and stand up for righteousness. Or am I just one of the countless millions who turn a deaf ear out of fear of being persecuted for standing up for the right thing? Now, I think most of us want to do right. But the understanding of justice varies with person to person, making it really a confusing topic at times on what is the right thing to be doing. You know, where two are gathered, there you will find three opinions. Jesus' warning is to be prepared when you are doing righteous acts, because the odds are it will not be consistent with the popular standards. And when that happens, you can experience persecution. Persecution comes when righteousness intersects with human greed and fear. Righteousness is a basic law of God's kingdom. Right actions know no boundaries, but is called to all of humanity to honor one another with acts of righteousness, with rightness toward all of our brothers and sisters. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Amen.